there is just a very robust knowledge of innovation tools and methods out there today that didn't exist 20 years ago. You have to understand customers better than customers understand themselves. Innovation is only 50% technology. If 50% of innovation is non-technological. So if you think about farming, it's going to be about using AI and digital tools to understand what crops to plant where, when to plant them, when to harvest them, when to fertilize, when to irrigate.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Professor Mahesh Podcast, your resource to help you make informed career decisions. As we like to believe, this is your future simplified. This podcast is brought to you by IIT Madras Global, an initiative of the Office of Global Engagement at IIT Madras. IITM Global is our platform to take our thinking, our philosophy, our research, innovation, our startups and teaching to the global stage. Learn more about their initiatives in the link below in the description. Innovation is all around us. Innovation drives value creation in society today. The topic for today's podcast conversation is just that. And we have one of the world's most renowned experts at helping us understand and parse this space, Mr. Stephen Ezell from ITIF in the United States of America. Stephen, welcome to this podcast. Thank you for making time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Your own academic journey started many moons ago at Georgetown. Tell us a little bit about your early days in college and where innovation really started to sort of bite you and become a part of you.
Well, I tell you, I'm from South Texas. I grew up on the border between Texas and Mexico, and just seeing the economic and social disparities between those two parts of the world led me to want to understand about the international economy, international business and politics. So I actually went to the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, SFS. And SFS trains you for diplomacy, to be a diplomat at the U.S. State Department. So that was the career track I long expected to be on. When I graduated in the year 1996, there was a hiring freeze at the State Department when Bill Clinton was president for several years. So that means that all of us who had studied to be diplomats were not going to be able to go down that career route. So I did not know what to do. But I was graduating. So I started to look for jobs and found a job at a startup company that originally was focused on kind of a boutique investment bank for mid-Atlantic technology companies. So we would connect the tech companies with accredited investors, private sources of capital. So that got me into kind of was initially the finance and the startup world. Did that for a couple of years and then joined for the first time a pure play tech startup in 1998 that was making an e-commerce business to consumer product, a smart receptacle that received packages delivered to your home. In the digital age, we raised $70 million in venture capital and had the whole true startup ride. So, but it was interesting. My early career moved from diplomacy then into technology and innovation.
Wonderful. I think there's no better person to help us parse this space than you. Thank you. Before we go deep into this conversation, let's just get a fundamental definition out of the way. In your mind, what's innovation?
Well, the official definition of innovation would be that it is the transformation of existing or the creation of new products, processes, services, or organizational models or business models. And innovation is that. But more fundamentally, innovation is about the transformation of existing conditions into preferred ones. Innovation is about envisioning and instantiating the changes that we want to see, whether it's to society, to a business, to a product, to a marketplace. Innovation is about a transformation to a better future. I'd also maybe add that the innovation is about a set of capabilities at the corporate level and the individual levels. Do you have the capacity and the ability for innovation? So it's also, innovation is both a noun and a verb.
That's a nice line. I think there is we see a lot of process innovation in India. I mean, there's a lot of work happening in making processes more, customer friendly, student friendly, citizen friendly. But there isn't as much product innovation. So maybe we'll come back and talk a little bit about that. But your own leadership roles that you've done post-graduation with organizations like Peer Insight, you worked very closely with the NASDAQ stock exchange, and now with ITIF. Tell us a little bit about what led you in these directions after your startup and in your own journey there.
Well, I will be quite honest that in my career, some of my transitions have been forced onto me, and some are voluntary. What I've been fortunate to be able to try to do in my career is to build things, is to create new things, whether that's a kind of a new product or a new company. So to explain it, Peer Insight, what that was an innovation research and consulting firm that we worked with the 50 global 500 corporations to cross-pollinate and help them learn from one another on best methods and practices of innovation, business model design, customer experience development. At the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, where I work now, interesting because at that job at Peer Insight, which was originally focused on helping businesses develop innovation methods, we started to work with governments around the world, like Finland and Ireland and Taiwan, to help them develop their national innovation systems. So at ITIF, we do innovation policy, which is international in scope. So what's been interesting about my career is that I've been able to finally kind of come back to the diplomacy I'd studied originally. And even here this week in India is on an initiative sponsored by the US State Department on science and tech policy. So it's from my career arc, it actually joins it up, I think, quite neatly. But more broadly, it's been exciting. And for me, it's been interesting because now I have seen innovation both from the startup company, the large multinational company, NASDAQ, and then from the public policy perspective. So I have been able to see these different views of innovation across various domains. And I think it's been helpful in my career to understand kind of the interest and starting points of the various actors who work on innovation systems and policy.
Wonderful. I think innovation in startups is, I think, somewhat well understood because startups don't survive unless you have a solution that's very clearly differentiated. But as a young professional, in my very first job, my boss sent me off in the US to sort of a management training school to help me understand research. And there was a 2-day case study on 3M, which by far has established itself as one of the most innovative large companies in the world. Help us understand, what does it take for a large company to choose to be innovative, and how do they think about it?
Well, I think especially for large organizations, there's got to be a mindset from the top that encourages experimentation and risk-taking across, the various elements of the company. If you hear Jeff Bezos speak about Amazon, he says that Amazon is in the business of putting Amazon out of business. What does that mean? Well, it means that his goal as a manager is to continually be disintermediating Amazon's old business model with a better business model, right? So Amazon itself disintermediated the traditional brick and mortar bookseller, obviously with online delivery, the big fulfillment centers. But that's not enough, right? They want to disintermediate that with ebooks, with the Kindle. Well, that's not enough. They want to disintermediate that business model with cloud computing and Amazon Web Services. So, as when a business professor said, just because you're a company that's not willing to disrupt or cannibalize or disintermediate your own business model doesn't mean that change is going to be forced. That change is not going to be forced upon you from the outside. So being a leader, being a manager, willing to recognize that change is a constant, and only the as Andy Grove of Intel said, only the crazy survive. Is I think part of, and then so mindset and the environment is one, but then it's processes, it's mechanisms, it's training, it's skills. If you look at the way Google, for instance, manages its innovation approach. What Google says, they have a 70-20-10 model for innovation. So 70% of the staffing and the money at Google go to search. Google always has to have the world's best search algorithm. And now that's why you got to integrate AI into search. But 20% of Google's innovation resources go to extension, adjacencies. So now we want to bring search into different environments. Why was there Google Android for the mobile phone? Well, that was to extend the search platform into different environments. They have Orkut was their social media network in South America, extend social media to search. And then 10% is the radical innovation. Google X, like Google Energy, Google autonomy, right? So the 70-20-10 model is an organizational structure to try to balance how you're allocating the organization's resources to a combination of incremental, sustaining innovation. You always have to get better improvements and processes, but you got to also be thinking about that transformative future. And so a successful innovation organization is kind of balancing this tension between maximally operationalizing the current and then imagining the future.
Interesting. Let's come to careers in innovation. What trends have you observed in how, particularly in science, technology, innovation is helping new careers evolve out on a global scale?
The information and communications technology revolution, which scantily existed 50 years ago, digitalization now accounts for 25% of global GDP. 13% of India's GDP is in the information technology or business processing outsourcing sector. That's millions of jobs, and so when kind of national innovation systems are working well, it is bringing new technologies into an economy that become the basis for the occupations and careers of the future. The innovation system is essential to enabling these new types of occupations and skills to enter into an economy. And with regard to just digitalization in particular, we were just talking earlier about digitalization in manufacturing. Whereas in 2002, in the United States, only about a third of manufacturing jobs required really intensive digital skills. Now it's close to 60%. So this process of digitalization is affecting every sector of the economy: banking, agriculture, finance, manufacturing. And I think that is going to create a lot of new opportunities for those in India and globally who are educated to take advantage of AI and of the web search, et cetera, because these are the technologies that are foundationally reshaping the global economy.
These sorts of foundational technologies, you started with search and now AI, are absolutely amazing enablers in terms of what they're able to do for people at large. When a young man or woman out there sort of is planning out an idea, and India is a fairly large startup ecosystem, where do you see the greatest opportunities? I mean, how would I think of I have an idea and I'm passionate about my idea. That's how young men and women are wired usually. How do I then go about ascertaining whether it is ready for the market, or should I be investing more of my time on it?
So I think one of the most significant challenges for budding entrepreneurs is most are going to be pretty good, especially in India with IITs. They're going to be good at understanding the technology, the capabilities of technology, where they tend to have a lacuna or a gap in understanding is in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Is in
Yeah.
what particular challenges or gaps that what they want to sell is going to feed into address a particular challenge of the organization, right? So market need sensing, customer need sensing is often the underappreciated a challenge for the entrepreneur, because they're so focused on their technology. They often believe in it so much, but do they understand who is the buyer going to be for that in a particular organization? How do you sell to that particular individual? How do you establish the relationship to know with the broader set of challenges that individual faces in the operating environment that you can speak to? So market sensing.
And are there tools that people can use to sort of understand the market, their own marketability and absorption? What sort of tools have you found most helpful for that?
Yeah, I think one of your questions was what advice I'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs and students. And I'd say a couple of things. I would say first, there is just a very robust knowledge of innovation tools and methods out there today that didn't exist 20 years ago. I would highly encourage your students to read books like The 10 Types of Innovation by Larry Doblin, a fantastic book that in a structured way talks through ideation and new product creation approaches for organizations, doing products and services alike. But I'm sure if the students have been exposed to like the works of Osterwalder and Pigneur, the business model canvas, the value proposition model canvas, a wonderful book called The Invincible Company. There's a great set of literature out there today about how you ideate products and then in this kind of structured way, connect them to marketplace needs. The second thing I would say is design thinking, right? Design thinking is a set of tools to try to put the entrepreneur in the customer's shoes and understand the world from their perspective and needs. The famous quote Henry Ford said, if I'd asked my customers what they wanted, they'd have told me a faster car. So the point for the entrepreneur is you have to understand customers better than customers understand themselves. Well, the only way you get there is by studying them in situ, the sociological, anthropological research, and design thinking teaches the entrepreneur to flip the page and put them in the customer's shoes.
Very interesting. That's exactly, I think, what students need. I mean, a set of tools, set of books and resources that they can get started with. From your perspective, what unique opportunities and obstacles do student entrepreneurs, I'm going to limit the discussion to graduating college students wanting to, maybe after a little bit of a stint in a job, want to start up. What obstacles do you think do they face, and what are some ways of overcoming them? In your own life, you've elsewhere talked about of the mentors you've had who have helped you navigate, professional life, your own professional life, and others. How can a young person out there sort of navigate this world of entrepreneurship?
It takes a village. It takes networks. If you think about like the role that venture capitalists play especially in the United States, most people think the VC provides money. That's only 10% of what the VC does. What the VC really is doing is opening doors to customers. It's opening doors to partners, to suppliers. It's opening doors to other sources of capital. It's opening doors to other technical experts in the field. So networking and establishing mentors, finding those who are willing to help you becomes critical. People ask what makes the Silicon Valley innovation environment different, and there really is a paying it forward mentality that's built over time. That there is an ethos and a codus that one helps another. I'm sure that exists in India. I know it does, but I think for countries that trying to replicate that ecosystem, that's not an easy part of it to get right. It's innovation is only 50% technology. If 50% of innovation is non-technological, and I think for the entrepreneur to understand that these broader social and market oriented aspects of the innovation effort, I think is a really critical challenge. But if I may, one other resource I would point entrepreneurs to, there's a gentleman named John Kao in the United States. He's recognized as a globally leading, innovation evangelist. He's the innovation consultant for NATO, right? For Nike, for BASF. But he talks about the 6 types of innovation intelligences that entrepreneurs have to have, and maybe walk through a couple of them. His first point is as an entrepreneur, you have to have kind of theory of change or a theory of activism. We talked about innovation earlier as as Steve Jobs said, it's only the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world who are the ones that actually do. Right. So you have to have that mindset theory of being irrationally ambitious for change. So it's a whole set of transformation skills. And then he says we have to have a whole set of leadership skills, right? Because leadership in itself is a set of skills you have to develop to get workers to go willingly where you want to go, to manage people effectively and inclusively. So there's a whole set of skill sets to manage around the leadership part of the equation. We talked about these innovation tools, these innovation methods. Well, that's a whole set of skills you have to master is innovation techniques. And a whole separate set of skills you have to master is around technology itself, right? How you use digital tools to transform businesses. So he has this really powerful framework to educate entrepreneurs in these 6 types of innovation intelligences. That's all available online. I'd encourage your listeners to go check it out because it's a powerful tool set.
That's interesting. I've heard of Howard Gardner's 6 types of intelligences, but this is a step more detailed. There's 6 types of innovation intelligences. Yeah, that's very nice. I think let's talk a little bit about medium scale, small and medium scale businesses. In India, just as in the US, small and medium scale businesses employ a large number of people, and they are practically an integral part and an increasingly important part of the whole economy. These are companies that are relatively profitable. They've been in business for a long time. Typically in India, they tend to be family-owned businesses. I am seeing, from my vantage point, a second or a third generation of the family wanting to infuse new ideas. What sort of a framework can we provide this sector for them to think about innovation in their own spaces?
Well, you make me think of the Mittelstand types of companies in Germany that are such a core backbone of that economy. The Chukinkugyo in Japan, which is the term for those firms in Japan. In many of those cases, they've proven successful because they've embedded themselves in communities or in business models, and the way we've always done things in the past is going to definitely be good enough to allow us to thrive in the future. And I think the reality is when you have these massively disruptive forms of technology like artificial intelligence that are pervading across the global economy today, that there's going to be new forms of competition entering marketplaces that just weren't there before. There are going to be new ways to use technologies to transform the products and services these organizations produce. So I think the younger generation can bring a mindset to either optimize what these organizations are now doing successfully, maybe think about how they can enter into more global markets, or to be responsive to the technologies and shifts that are transforming industries and markets today.
I think the point you make is the old style of doing business may not survive, and they will need to do something different. And what you're suggesting is to harness the power of the new and emerging tools to improve their processes. These are typically, let's to sort of take that one step further, these are typically quite profitable in their own right. How would a company sort of come into a mindset of foregoing a part of their profit to innovate? Because innovation comes at an expense. It comes at people cost. It comes at, there's a cost to it. What have you seen as examples like this?
Maybe I could just tell briefly the story of Kodak.
Yeah.
Kodak was the third most well-recognized consumer brand in the year 2002, the year it went bankrupt. How do you take a company that's the world's third most recognized technology, business, and drive it into bankruptcy? And the reason it went back to the year 1979, when this Kodak engineer named Steve Sassoon had invented a prototype for the first digital camera. It was kind of an 8-pound box, very ugly and very ungainly. But the story goes that he had the opportunity to present his new digital camera technology to the C-level executives of Kodak in Rochester in 1980. And he goes in and he presents the digital camera, and he talks about the future of digital photography. And the CEO of Kodak, Ken Whitaker, says to Steve, that's cute, but do not tell anybody about it. Because they realized that they made their money when you took pictures. They had the business, the razors and blades business model. You sell you the camera, make money off the photos. They recognized that in a world where digital photography prevailed, their profit per photo taken would drop to cents on the dollar, right? So Kodak's reaction was to delay the introduction of digital photography technology as long as they possibly could, so they could monetize all the high profit margins from their celluloid film business. Well, they didn't turn out a truly integrated digital camera, the Advantix, till the year 2004. What happened in 2006? Apple releases the iPhone, and it all goes digital. And about 6 years later, the company goes bankrupt. So it was a great example in the Kodak history that just because you weren't willing to change, that you weren't willing to adopt a new business model, a new customer experience for the future, you actually went out of business. So there's a lot of stories like that in the corporate history, but what they come back to is leaders who were slaving to the previous business model, the previous architecture of the revenues, as Parks John Seeley Brown talked about, and they just couldn't envision the future. And that was the whole point of the jobs code: is being an innovator, right, is to step into the future and envision that transformed world, and then make it a reality for organization. So, sorry if that was a long-winded answer, but but by the way, academics call what I kind of just described the innovation paradox. So by the time that Kodak realized, oh my gosh, now we really have to innovate, well, the sales were constrained, their room for maneuver was weakening, they couldn't invest in the R&D of the future, and even nations fall into this kind of innovation paradox trap. Like when the recognition that we have to innovate comes just too late in the game. So for these types of companies, we're talking about the mid-tiers, don't get into that innovation paradox trap where, because now when times are good, when you can invest in R&D, well, you don't want to, or you don't need to because business is doing well. Well, you got to think about the future and position yourself for the change that may confront you.
That's a perfect example to drive home the point. Thank you for that. I think along the way, you mentioned business model, razors and blades, as an example. When an innovator sits down to develop their product, and as you said earlier, they're obsessed with their technology part. But it's equally important, if not more, to wrap around a viable business plan, business model as to how would one go about monetizing the innovation. What are some ways of looking at business model development? How would I envision a business model for a product I have in mind?
Well, yes, as Henry Chesbrough, who was an acclaimed innovation analyst or academician at Berkeley, once said, an inferior technology taken to market with a superior business model will always beat out a superior technology taken to market with an inferior business model. It's an important point for budding entrepreneurs to understand. In the digital age of today, we've seen such a proliferation of different forms of business models. I guess the first point to make here would be to understand that innovation in whatever sector is a function of cost versus value. Right? What does it cost you to deliver this, and what is the value that a customer is willing to pay? And the business model has got to intermediate between those two concerns while also finding a way to defend and keep appropriable a share of the gains from the innovation for the customer. So I think a great example of that, right, was in the earliest days of the internet. You had all these web search firms, Lycos and Ask Jeeves, right? And they created tremendous value for the customer. I can go online and do my search and find this or that. But it wasn't until Google came along with this bi-directional business model that monetized customer search against the business ad sales, that now they had a business model where they could appropriate a share of that value they were creating for the business, right? And so, today, whether it's, freemium models or subscription models or gain sharing, right? I mean, I think gain sharing is a very powerful model, especially if you're in some of these kind of hard tech oriented places. Can you bring, hey, I got this IoT solution. You bring that in the company and you say, hey, if I can, instead of just selling the product, maybe you can say, I'll participate in the share of the gains from the efficiency of the production that we're bringing. That's kind of your business model. That's a very interesting approach today. It's going to be interesting to see this unfold in the artificial intelligence world. So there are going to be a set of companies that are going to go for kind of a proprietary closed ecosystem AI models, like selling a whole AI instantiation to Procter & Gamble. But then if you look at what Meta is doing, Meta is going all open source because they want to build kind of a development ecosystem around AI. Just kind of like, remember Linux was open source, but then Red Hat built a business model atop that free service, but by adding premium value-added enhancements on top of it. So but I would just add here as well, like this book I mentioned, the business model canvas by Osterwald and Pinnier, wonderful book that kind of walks through many of these different types of business models and provides practical advice for entrepreneurs to how to assess their viability and choose between them.
Increasingly, I remember a day when I was a graduate student at Purdue in the US, and then I worked where I could buy a piece of software. I would have a CD shipped to me. There is no way today I can buy software out there. It's all on a monthly or a yearly subscription basis. So the business model wrapped around software as an industry has completely been upturned. What is the next upturn in your mind? We're already in this phase where I have to subscribe on a monthly or a yearly basis. What are some ideas that are being experimented with in that space?
One of the points I've been trying to make in these visits throughout India, there's a great study done the other day, which estimated that fully 50% of the value that gets created in the global economy over the next decade will be created digitally. It'll be created by the ability to extract actionable insight and intelligence from data in real time. So if you think about farming, it's going to be about using AI and digital tools to understand what crops to plant where, when to plant them, when to harvest them, when to fertilize, when to irrigate. If we're talking about healthcare, it's solutions like we see in India today, where you're going out into the villages with an iPhone and you're taking a picture of someone's eyes, and the system is detecting in real time, is there glaucoma there? So what I'm trying to, in finance, it's going to be about real-time movement of markets to make trades that add value. So what I'm driving at is, in the world of tomorrow, it's going to be how you're developing a product, service that is creating value in that moment for a customer. And so then that moves away from this monthly subscription model. Value is not going to be monthly. Value is going to be in the moment. Value is going to be delivered at the point of action or sale or activity in real time. So I think the best companies are going to be, figuring that out. So it's micro transaction. It's micro, value addition in the moment that, adds up over time.
Is it absolutely? Is it conceivable that a tomorrow's company can get paid in data and less in dollars and cents? I would rather have my customer open up their data streams to me, and for that, I'm willing to go very low ball on pricing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's models of data management, data valuation. I think that will become increasingly a meritorious business model going forward. I think there's one thing for India, that there could be incredible opportunity, and already we're seeing the development of data repositories, because AI only can be as effective as the data models and the data sets it's trained upon. Yes. And India is really facing a data gap for a number of reasons. One, right, because as the whole global ICT ecosystem has developed, many of the largest global service providers have come from the United States. But even within India, the data governance approach has tended to be siloed. So, you have a great DPI, but only the DPI has the data. You have transportation. So within India, to try to start to coordinate these data sets together, provide data repositories that can be sold to business as a platform for AI innovation, I think, and it will be a very significant growing business in India going forward.
And there's room for the private sector to actively participate in that. Yeah. Let's switch to the overall innovation pipeline. We talked of ideation all the way to product creation, marketing, then value realization. In the whole pipeline is a step that protects your innovation, and that's patenting. That's the global standard today. You've studied the Bayh-Dole Act, which changed the game on how universities in particular participate in this whole patent development process. Let's help our audience understand the Bayh-Dole Act and what it did for the US context, and then we come talk about India.
Absolutely. Maybe start with some history. In the 1970s, the US government had title to 30,000 different patents, only 5% of which had ever been commercialized. In fact, a study done in 1968 had assessed that no single new drug had ever been developed in the United States from federally funded research, in part because the government took license to that ownership of the intellectual property away. So in 1980, at this time of kind of U.S. economic malaise, Senators Bayh-Dole and Bob Birch introduced the Bayh-Dole Act. What it is legislation that gives universities the rights to the intellectual property that stems from federally funded scientific research. Universities can take title to that intellectual property, and then they're able to license it out to entrepreneurs, often the technologists who had originally done that research. But the impact of Bayh-Dole on the U.S. innovation system and academic technology transfer activities has been profound. From 1996 to 2020 alone, academic technology transfer enabled by the Bayh-Dole Act has led to 550,000 invention disclosures, 150,000 new patents, and 18,000 startup companies launched in the United States. 73% of the IP that gets licensed goes to small companies. So it's a critical conduit to moving technology into small promising companies. And it's contributed over $1 trillion directly to US GDP. So a key point to understand about the US innovation system, as enabled by Bayh-Dole, is this pipeline from federally funded research, which is done by promising young entrepreneurs at US universities, and then with the ability to transition that technology out into a pipeline of startup companies. So if you look at many of the most well-known US startup companies, Google, Genentech, Cisco, they all flowed directly out of this mechanism.
When the act was being written and being formed, I'm sure there were arguments for and against. And the one argument I hear, at least in India, is it's after all taxpayer money. Why should a small group of private individuals profit from work done using taxpayer money? What would be your what was the argument that won the day for Bayh-Dole?
Well, ultimately, I think it was that, technology that sits on a shelf and never sees the light of day is no use to anybody. And the reality, as I said at the outset, was 30,000 patents, but no commercialization, because the fundamental reason is that it takes risk and expense to try to commercialize these technologies. The vast majority of time, the efforts are going to fail. And what America realized is that there's that the taxpayer has an interest in the first order at seeing that this research is done and this knowledge is created. That's the payback to society at large. Now, if an individual or a company is going to undertake the risky, difficult, expensive, long process of trying to actually make something out of that technology, then they should be rewarded for undertaking those efforts. Also with a recognition that if a new drug is going to be developed or a new technology introduced, that is a second way that value is added to society and that the taxpayer receives a reward. You think about Google, and Google, oh, well, that was always going to succeed. They were always going to win. No, did you realize that it came out of Stanford, and you talked to those guys or the Stanford Technology Transfer Office, over 40 venture capitalists turned Larry and Sergey down. I mean, you could talk to Kitty Imamura, who ran the Stanford Technology Transfer Office at the time. She said we could barely get VCs to talk to these guys. We couldn't find anybody to fund them.
Because they were not the first search engine. They were the 11th or the 12th search engine, but they had done something different and well. Correct. That's a good perspective. So what I'm hearing you say is that the taxpayer's view of this should be A, the knowledge creation, and B, that's not the end of the sort of the investment infusion. There's a significant investment of risk and time and capital that has to go in to commercialize a patent into something usable. And that's not being borne by taxpayers. That's being borne by the private group of individuals themselves. So it's a little bit like a little bit of a partnership where the taxpayer bears the initial expense, but there's almost a multiple of it that's borne by outsiders to help commercialize it. In this whole value chain past the patent, is there a process by which a similar safety net can be provided to startups and individuals? Because I can now look at the Bayh-Dole as a little bit of a safety net that was provided for innovators. That you could take some taxpayer money, particularly if you were in the small and medium scale sector. How far can this safety net go? Can you sort of protect the downside for venture capitalists? Is there a model that other countries may have experimented with in that space?
Well, I think the way to answer that is to say, it's often said that the United States doesn't do innovation policy or doesn't do industrial policy. But the reality is there's actually a lot of hidden innovation frameworks within the US system.
It's the world's largest innovation engine. There's no confusion about it.
But what I'm driving at is there's a whole set of programs like the Small Business Innovation Research Program, the SBIR program, which provides $3 billion of R&D funding from 11 different U.S. agencies to small businesses. So when they come out of this Bayh-Dole transition, the technology, the startup company, now they're eligible to go to the U.S. government for programs like SBIR to get initial seed capital for, validating product feasibility or overcoming a technical, R&D hurdle. So we have structures in place to help that startup scale. So I think, policy needs to be mindful of kind of the valley of death that these tech startups go through. And so usually after Bayh-Dole, yes, there's got to be a set of programs and mechanisms in place to help the startups alone as they grow through those very initial phases, and to help them with some early access to seed capital to further build their product or do proof of concepts, to get them to a point in the market where they can then go to like venture capitalists and the private sources of capital. So there's got to be a broader ecosystem kind of supporting these nascent startups.
That's a much more comprehensive picture of where the taxpayer can participate as a value creator. Let's talk about universities. And clearly, Bayh-Dole has been a game changer for us professors in academia. What's your advice to universities that are still sort of shaping their innovation ecosystems? What would be some things we can learn from others to create something that students and faculty members can really be active participants in?
Well, I'd first say that if you ask me what really differentiates or distinguishes America's innovation system from that of any other country in the world, is that we have turned our universities into engines of innovation like no one else has. We talked about the 18,000 startups right over the last quarter century. So one other point that comes out of that is that now about at least 40% of US universities have a formal incubator or accelerator attached to that university, helping students or faculty launch, the new businesses or products they want to. So I mentioned that because I think there's a lot that can be learned from looking at what the US has done well there. So for India, I'd start there. I'd start at assessing what are the innovation resources or assets that the university makes available to students and faculty. That could be, it could be as complex as, bench space or wet labs if it's bio, right? So it could be physical infrastructure, but it doesn't have to be the physical, building. It can be the mentors. It can be the alumni connections. It could be the broader kind of network of business support for the new startups. But how every Indian university needs an answer to the question, how am I helping companies launch out of here? The second thing I would say is we talked about these methods, these techniques, these practices of innovation. Those should be taught to all students at even high schools these days. Let's equip individuals with the knowledge they need to ideate and create. And it's not just for technology. That's important to understand. If you're going to go work in government services, you need to understand how to use these tools to better deliver constituent services. So, there's much that universities can do to create this knowledge base for innovation more broadly. Maybe I'd also add a couple of other things structurally. You're seeing a lot of U.S. universities that are now making entrepreneurial leave a possibility for faculty and for students, that you can put your faculty tenureship on hold for a few years to go try and launch a company. You're seeing also at a lot of U.S. universities for faculty on the tenure track, entrepreneurship elements like commercialization or patenting become every bit as important as publishing. So structurally, there are a lot of ways that universities can tilt the environment from ivory tower to which has its place, but to innovation.
No, I'm a participant of an ivory tower at IIT Madras, and I can be very honest and tell you that the tower itself is changing, and I think we have to be participants in value creation for society, we professors. Talking of the incubators, and 40% of the US universities have an attached incubator. That's a staggering number for a large number of universities to start with, right? Do they take an equity position in these companies? How is the incubator itself sustainable?
Oh, it depends on the university of approach. But
what's some good and bad? Let me
tell you a story.
Yeah.
So, Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, one of the best at biomedical engineering. They did not have an incubator till about the year 2016. And so they finally created this one called Fast Forward. And so I got invited to its dedication, its opening. And I was talking to the guy who organized it, and he's like, well, let me tell you the story, Steve. He said, well, so what happened is around like 2012, the faculty who would be interviewing at the best universities around the country would come and they'd ask, okay, Johns Hopkins, what infrastructure do you have here to help me launch the business? I want to launch, and we this or that, but nothing really. Okay, that went on for a few years. He said, but then a couple years later, like 2014, the students would come for their campus interviews, and the students would ask, how are you going to help me launch my company? And we didn't have an answer for that. And he said, well, that's what got the attention of every department across the university. And now at Hopkins, it's the philosophy and the English and the history and the engineering departments. We all co-finance across all of our departments this institution because we know it's critical for Hopkins getting the very best students we want here. So that was a transformative, mind shift across the entire university. And so I say that because if you're just creating it, a lot of these universities, it's probably going to be just co-financed by the departments themselves. But beyond that, a number of U.S. states are now putting in place funding measures for their universities to launch these types of programs. There was legislation attached to the SBIR reauthorization recently that provides a federal channel for some of this money. So many funding streams coming in, but I think increasingly, by state policymakers, by federal policymakers, by the universities themselves, this is seen as an area that, we need to invest in. Now, certainly, if you're talking at Berkeley or University of Florida, then yeah, they got very sophisticated programs because they've got 50 years of technology licensing that can fund self-sustaining technology transfer offices. But for, the newer universities that, they're recognizing that they're going to have to bootstrap initially and build this going forward.
At IIT Madras, we've been fortunate. We created our incubator about probably 12 years ago, and last year we filed almost 400 patents, and almost at 15-20% are on their path to being commercialized. I think there is still a missing link in this whole process of a university-owned IP being licensed or somehow transferred to a startup. I see that as a little bit of a friction generator, pain point in this process. Can you give us some examples you may have seen from your vantage point that we can learn from?
Part of it is taking there are really two models that is generally done. You are either taking a share of the equity of the firm, or you're taking a share of the profits that the firm earns over time. I think both approaches have pros and cons. I would tend to structure it as taking a very light share of long-term equity in the firm. But I think the critical thing is this: A, taking a long-term time horizon in the investment vehicle, and B, the co-participation element of it, right? That it's not, the firm's not paying a flat rate up front for this technology, but no, it's seen as being an investment and a long-term partnership in the business. And again, you're also bringing a venture capital approach to it a little bit, that then the university, the technology transfer office, is saying, okay, this is a relationship that we're going to be in over time, and we're going to help your business flourish.
I think that I've heard you say co-participation in one form or other at least 2 or 3 times, which I think is got to be the model in this whole space. Be it, the Bayh-Dole Act was a citizen co-participation in value creation, and here it's the university. I think that's a good high-level philosophy for a university to have as, to take this forward. Let's talk about the US-India Trust Initiative. What do you see as, where do you see the US-India collaboration, particularly the Trust Initiative, which is intended to accelerate deployment of secure and large-scale AI infrastructure in both countries, shared infrastructure, I presume. Where do you see this headed?
The Trust Initiative reforms to, it's actually an acronym for transforming the relationship utilizing strategic technologies. So I think it's really about, deepening long-term U.S.-India strategic relationships through the potential of emerging technologies to, enhance our security and turbocharge our economic growth and grow, high-tech employment in both countries. The Trust Initiative envisions deepening U.S.-India technology relationships across a wide variety of sectors, from AI and semiconductors to quantum, but also others like biotechnology, critical minerals, aerospace, and defense. And clearly, there are any number of ways in which there's robust opportunities for Indian and U.S. universities to collaborate on research and education, to develop and advance these technologies. There are numerous ways U.S. and Indian companies can collaborate to co-develop technologies. You asked about artificial intelligence in particular. And one of the particular initiatives of the Trust Initiative is in the year 2025 to build a roadmap for accelerating India's AI infrastructure. That, of course, has a number of elements. Of course, it is assuring that India has access to the high-end artificial intelligence GPUs that it needs to fulfill its goals. At least 34,000 GPUs have been called for. Fortunately, we repealed our AI diffusion rules, so India should not have a problem acquiring those chips. But obviously, it's not just the chips themselves. These have to operate in high-end cloud computing data centers. So an important part of the relationship is U.S.-India collaboration to build out cloud data centers in India to support AI applications. But even as other things like undersea cables. So now there's a big initiative with Meta to bring a high-speed underwater cable from the U.S. to India. So, all across the board, it is thinking about these core elements, especially around infrastructure, around data, and around the developer ecosystem that India needs to fulfill its aspirations to be a leading player in the global AI economy.
US and India are sort of natural strategic partners in many ways. There's shared values, there's shared peoples on both sides. This Trust Initiative itself has room for private players in India as well as academia. What's the motivation there? How do you see private players in India being able to take advantage of trust?
I think there's incredible opportunity. in the university and the academic part of the relationship. It should be noted that the Trust Initiative grows out of the previously named ISET initiative, the U.S.-India Initiative on Critical and Emerging Technologies. And under that initiative, as I understand, there was a relationship developed between IIT Madras and Purdue University, a 5-year kind of a memorandum of understanding to co-develop curriculum around chip design, advanced chip engineering. So strong examples in the semiconductor and AI space of curriculum development and student exchange in these high-tech fields. In biotechnology, as I understand, there's now a big initiative between Stanford University and the Wadhwani Institute. The processes to develop the active pharmaceutical ingredients, the APIs that are the central active ingredient for innovative drugs. So there's work being done on enzymatic processes and modern flow chemistry between those institutes. So I think what this is about is about developing new technologies and just a wonderful set of opportunities between U.S. and Indian institutions. Maybe it's worth adding that certainly a motivation for the Trust Initiative is on helping India and the United States together develop more secure global supply chains in many fields. The reality today, you look at China. China manufactures 80% of the world's solar panels. They manufacture 77% of the world's EVs. They process and refine 70% of the world's critical minerals or rare earth minerals, and a similar share of these active pharmaceutical ingredients. So to the extent the US and India can collaborate with new technological approaches to develop the next generation of technologies in these areas and to help more of these be manufactured in our countries, we will go a long way to securing our supply chains.
A requirement of this trust, an initiative like trust taking off, is the ability to protect sensitive technologies when we are operating collaboratively. What are some things we can do together, the US and India, to help protect sensitive technologies so they don't get into bad actors' hands?
We talk about a lot about data privacy, for instance, and where a lot of people think that to achieve data security, a large element of that is where the data is stored. But the reality is no. Data protection is about the means and mechanisms used, in fact, to store data securely. And I say that because to protect our technologies, ensuring that companies, especially SMEs in both the US and India, have access to the cybersecurity resources and tools they need to, defend their networks and defend their technology is a major challenge. Only 10% of US small manufacturers have been adjudged to be cyber secure in their operations. So there's a great opportunity to collaborate on the development of new cybersecurity technologies that we could deploy across both of our economies to enhance our security in that kind of way. And then, I think the other, to protect, intellectual property rights are an important aspect of that as well. And we know that countries like China have active cyber espionage operations. They have active cyber hacking operations to get into our companies and steal their technology. We can collaborate as well around exchanging knowledge and intelligence to help our companies secure their information when they are exposed to cyber threats in the global environment.
A requirement of this whole paradigm to succeed is to start at the ground level and build AI research, collaborative AI research initiatives. Where do you see trust helping those kinds of collaborative research opportunities?
So India is yet to develop its first India-specific large language model. The US rolled out 40 last year. So I think on the high-end research side, it's collaboration between U.S. and India, especially as the country seeks to roll out those initial large language models. One thing that India has a real opportunity with artificial intelligence is to bring multilingual AI to the equation. I understand you have 22 official languages and 120 spoken languages. And so developing the data sets that are going to enroll that very wide variety of knowledge and cultural history into kind of this foundational India AI model is a big challenge ahead. And there's opportunity for our research to collaborate to as these India specific AI foundational large language models are being built out.
That's a great example. In fact, here at IIT Madras, we have a group of faculty and students who run an initiative called AI for Bharat. They've done exactly what you're suggesting, gather data, spoken and written data in 22 official languages plus, and train LLMs. And I think there's a great opportunity to collaborate and do more. The government's own participation in trust and these kinds of initiatives. Where do you see the government, academia, private sector collaboration sort of take off again in the space of AI?
There are roles that each of these types of actors are going to play in the ecosystem. I think for policymakers, for government officials, one of the most important roles is sweeping away the impediments to making this vision happen. In the U.S. case, as I mentioned, with the repeal of the AI diffusion rules, we've already seen our government removing an impediment to India having access to the AI compute capacity it's going to need for this AI revolution. I think on the flip side of the Indian government, or from the Indian perspective, one thing that India is going to have to do is to, frankly, achieve a more mature relationship with data. If this vision is going to become reality, I'll give you an example. IBM has this thing called Deep Thunder. It is their weather forecasting and prediction system. Deep Thunder can give hyper-specific weather forecasts down to a 1 square mile radius every 5 minutes. Very impressive weather forecasting technology. Well, it was piloting this service with the Indian National Weather Service, and it was all going good. And then somebody realized, this data is having to go to California to IBM Almaden in Palo Alto to be processed on the IBM supercomputer. And once that was realized, the Indian government said, no, you can't transfer that data because weather data is a sensitive, national security issue. And so the whole initiative was closed down because that data had to move. I think if India ever got its way and had the WTO e-commerce customs duty moratorium passed, that India could impose tariffs or customs on the movement of data or the movement of semiconductor blueprints, that would be unfavorable for India's innovation system. So from the policymaker side, removing impediments to data or information or technology so that the private sector can proceed and move forward with these innovations expeditiously is critical. On the university side, we talked about the researchers, the academic exchange. By the way, one thing I think we should do with trust is to put a trust student visa. Why don't we, if you're working in these trust fields, for entrepreneurs and faculty and scientists, let's put in place a trust visa to really turbocharge this partnership. Yeah, and then on the corporate side, again, this is all across the board. But just the other day, General Atomics and Third Eye announced a semiconductor fab in India, building chips for the defense space. So obviously we have Micron in Gujarat now with a new ATP facility. Apple, by the end of this year, more than half of Apple iPhones going to the United States will be manufactured in India. So just incredible opportunity across all of these high-tech sectors we talked about, to deepen both the scientific linkages that underpin the technology, but then the business activities that are producing these high-tech products.
I think data sovereignty is becoming an issue globally, and I don't know the answer, but you always hear pros and cons on that on that issue both ways. I think you certainly batted well for the idea that a little bit of freedom is great. You can have innovation thrive on both ends of the value spectrum. Um, IPR, we have our own patenting systems in India and in the US. How do you see the whole IPR regime as a tool for sharing technology, sharing innovation, panning out under the trust umbrella?
Well, I would just make the comment about data. Yeah, and you're right. The terms, digital sovereignty, especially prevalent in Europe these days. You hear, digital autonomy, data sovereignty, and certainly and undoubtedly, policymakers have a vitally important role to play in ensuring data privacy and data security. But I think policymakers are better served when they're really talking about digital and data empowerment, digital enablement, digital literacy. Too much of policymakers' time across the world is focused on this data sovereignty notion and not enough about what policymakers should do to equip businesses and individuals with the skill sets they need to take advantage of this digital revolution. So, digital empowerment is how I would frame that question. With regard to the intellectual property side of the equation, my first comment would be, it's very difficult to achieve innovation without the protection of ideas. And intellectual property rights are not an artifact of the developed North or rich companies. Intellectual property rights exist so that entrepreneurs, they exist to unleash the capacity of entrepreneurs to build new products and services for the benefit of humankind. So, IPRs are in the service of entrepreneurship in the first order. Certainly, we're seeing that India has made really significant strides in enhancing the quality of its intellectual property environment in modern times. In fact, we need to learn from India. You have just introduced website blocking, which is a mechanism that allows internet service providers to take down websites that are devoted to piracy or counterfeiting. So making the environment, the digital environment, more secure within India. On the patent side, I think, without delving into too many details, when there's clarity on patent subject matter eligibility, that entrepreneurs and inventors know what is and what is not eligible for patenting, can make patent systems work more effectively for all countries. But I would say that incredible opportunity across these deep tech sectors we're talking about, like quantum, like biotech. If these companies are investing the hundreds of millions of dollars it takes to come up with breakthrough innovations in these fields, they're going to want to have the ability to ensure that their investments can be protected for a limited period of time, so that they can, profit off their innovations, but crucially also have the revenues that they need to invest in future generations of innovation. Because what patent systems, when they work effectively for countries, they're enabling that innovation ecosystem so that a company can take its profits from one generation of innovation to invest in the next. So in semiconductors, for a company, it's the profits from that 14 nanometer line that beget the 7 nanometer. That beget the 5 and the 3. For drug companies, it's about the profits from a cure for arthritis or for cholesterol that now gives them the funds to try to go and invent a cure for pancreatic cancer or Alzheimer's. So IPRs, conceived more holistically, enable this innovation flywheel in economy to unfurl.
Sure. No, undoubtedly, protection has been a great enabler for all societies. I think the more governments do to protect inventors and entrepreneurs' rights, the more value broadly is created for the society at large.
You can't have innovation without the protection of ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Stephen, this has been a fascinating conversation. We've covered a lot of ground in just an hour. Thank you so much for making time to come have this conversation with us. I'm sure um, our audience will have the opportunity to pick up on all of the resources you pointed us to. I think that's wonderful to sort of have all of it in one place for our audience to really, find and learn and derive value for themselves. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much
a
for having me.
wonderful
It's been a pleasure.
conversation. This is another episode of the Professor Mahesh podcast, your resource to help you make informed career decisions. Until we meet again, be well, do good, and keep in touch. Goodbye.